Now I want you, just for a moment, to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a future that goes beyond your day-to-day problems, goes beyond your day-to-day challenges and opportunities, a future where you're flying miles, thousands of miles above the planet Earth. And as you get closer and closer, you see vast oceans, you see vast stretches of land and desert and forest. It's beautiful, but there aren't many people. And as you get closer and closer, all of a sudden in the distance you see lights, and you begin to hear sounds. You fly over Washington, D.C., and the sounds are bickering and arguing and no one listening. You fly over state capitals, and much of the same. But as you get much closer to the ground, these lights begin to intensify. The sounds begin to intensify. And you see something wondrous. You see people walking fast. You see people in cars. You see people on bikes and on mopeds and on scooters. And you finally land. And you land at an intersection where things are coming at you at lightning speed from all different directions at all different levels. In fact, it's not just people coming at you at lightning speed, it's ideas. Imagine if you could actually see ideas the same way that you see people. These ideas are colliding, sparks are flying. And all of a sudden at this intersection you see these things that look like levers. Some people don't even see them, others ignore them. And there are some people pulling the lever, but nothing's happening. Well, welcome to the City 2.0. You've landed at the intersection where innovation occurs, where people collide, where ideas collide, and those are levers of change. I really do believe that if you want to change the world, you should land at an intersection in a city in America, whether it is Chicago or Des Moines. And that's what I'm about to talk about. I was at the Clinton Global Initiative last year moderating a panel, and next to me was the president of Iceland, Ólafur Grimsson, and he said something that it stuck with me. He said, you know the problem with you Americans? You spend too much time waiting for Washington. Now, I have a confession. I actually was my party's nominee for the United States Senate. And you notice when I was introduced, the word senator did not come up, so I think you can figure out how that turned out. But my point being that I look back now and realize that I was seeking to be elected to a place that is totally dysfunctional. And now today I get the opportunity to work in places that are largely very functional because they're closer to the ground where we are engaging in change by us. So what's the biggest driver of global economic growth? It is cities, which is why we're here today. If you were coming into Earth, like I said earlier, you would see this phenomenon that we huddle in these places called cities. And you heard Scott talk about density. If you want to find density of human beings and density of ideas, the place to be is cities. Now, with cities come challenges and come problems. Poverty, traffic congestion, pollution. But also with cities comes wondrous imagination and innovation. And that's what I want to focus on today. Because if you think about this, there are 65 million people that are being added to the urban population that are coming to cities every single year. That's the equivalent of 7 Chicagos every single year. This world is changing. For the first time on record, more than half the people in the world live in cities. Why? Because they are incubators of innovation. So, if that's true, if you agree with my premise that the cities are the biggest drivers, and the regions, by the way, around the cities as well, then what's the biggest driver in cities? Now, you might think I'm going to say technology, and that would be a good answer. You might think I'm going to say globalization. That would be a great answer. But I think there is one thing above all other, and that is you, change makers. People who are willing, regardless of their title, who are willing to dedicate their lives to making change and not listening to people who say, you're too young, you don't have the credentials, you don't have the capacity. The intersection I talked about earlier, it wasn't an intersection of streets, it was an intersection of sectors. An intersection of the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the public sector, the philanthropic sector, but that's not the only intersection. It's the intersection of established leaders and emerging leaders. It's the intersection of all levels of government. Given scarce resources, we don't have any choice. That's where we have to be every day, at these intersections in cities. So, what's the number one value that makes a great city? I think it's humility. Why? Because if you believe that you've got all the talent you need in your city, and there's nothing to learn from someone else, you are going to lose the economic competition. I don't care how effective your mayor is, I don't care how much talent there is in your city, if you are not spending time learning cross-border about what other cities are doing around the country and the world, then you will be passed by. So I would recommend an approach that I call facing your challenges and opportunities. It stands for framing the issue, then it talks about acting on that issue and connecting and engaging, much like the crowdsourcing that you heard about earlier. So what's frame mean? Well, it starts with your vision of the future. My father-in-law was a prisoner of war in World War II, Michael Zone. And we often wondered how he survived when younger men and stronger men and healthier men did not. But he would never talk about the experience. But after he died, my mother-in-law pulled out of the closet the diary that he had kept as a prisoner of war that he had never shared with any of his children. And all of a sudden it became very clear how my father-in-law survived. Two things jumped out from the pages. One was the stories of the 9 children that he would someday raise, one of whom would become my wife. And the other, this was a man who was an Italian who loved to eat, but had no idea how to cook. But somehow, as a prisoner of war, all throughout the diary were recipes of everything ranging from pasta to cottage cheese. Things that when he finally came back to the States and tried to make, he had no idea how to do. How could he do such a thing? This is an excerpt from his diary. I'll tell you how he did it. He did it because he could see beyond the cruelty of the guards. He could see beyond the barbed wire. He could see something that some other men could not. He could see his own future. In fact, in this case, he could taste his own future. When I served as Attorney General of Ohio, I traveled to Ohio's prisons. And I met young men and women for whom prison was a land beyond pain. They had no vision of their future. For them, in some ways, being in prison was a good thing because in their neighborhood it was far tougher than behind prison bars. And I came to understand then that the greatest gift you can give a human being and the greatest gift you can give a city or a state or even a nation is the ability to see your own future. And if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at actually change, which is why framing is so important. So I believe it's important to look at the vitals of your city. What are the things that really indicate whether your city is healthy? And the framework that I advocate is one that you won't forget because it spells out the word city. Now, this talks about a service engine soon. We all are familiar with our car when the light goes on and we know something's wrong, right? I believe you've got to have a way to be able to benchmark your success and get an early warning if your city is in trouble. So we've established something called City Vitals. And you'll remember them because they spell the word city, connectedness, innovation, talent, and your distinctive assets. What do I mean by connected? How do you connect your human capital with your physical capital, with your social capital? How do you connect inward? How do you connect outward with the rest of the world? Innovation and entrepreneurship, how do you foster a risk-taking culture? Talent, how do you engage and develop and retain and attract talent like is in this room? And how do you capitalize on what makes your city different than everybody else by building on your distinctive assets? But I also believe that once you've framed your city. Your work is not done. Maybe you've got a sense of indicators and benchmarks, the city vitals, but now it's time to act. I use this example because I believe that sometimes we think that the reason the world's changed so fast is only because of technology, and I would argue that it's actually for a different reason. In 1896, the way that men used to, and women too, used to jump over the high bar was something called the scissors. And they were pretty good at it, but then somebody said, you know, if we go on our side, the Western roll, we'll be able to go higher. And then some coaches said, we think there's still another way. All this, by the way, without the benefit of any technology. And in 1936, by the way, that picture looks very dangerous to me. I don't know about you. But that was the straddle. That's something I would never have tried. But in 1968, there was a guy who was a student at Oregon State, and he said, I'm going to try something new. His coach laughed at him. He said, I'm going to go on my back. The students laughed at him. He wasn't actually very good at any of these, but he was so good that his name, Dick Fosbury, it became known as the Fosbury Flop. And now when you see the Olympics, everyone goes on their back, and they're able to go literally almost 2 feet higher than they were back in 1896. Why? Because they defied conventional wisdom, they didn't listen to the conventional theory, and they had a new paradigm shift without any technology, simply a new way of thinking. We send over 8 billion text messages a day, before we go to bed tonight. There are 7 billion people on Earth. 42% will have been sent by one person, my daughter, Jessica. So I understand the world of text messages. My son graduated from Syracuse University a few years ago. And when Peggy and I, my wife, asked him what he wanted to do with his life, he said, what I want to do hasn't been invented yet. My son's not unique. He's like many of you. We are educating you for jobs that do not yet exist using technologies that have not yet been invented to solve problems that none of us in this room even know is a problem. And I would argue that that's why Wayne Gretzky had it right. When they asked him what makes you a Hall of Fame hockey player, he said, hey, I just learned how to skate where the puck was going, not where the puck is, which is what my definition of economic development is all about. When you act, I think the most important thing is not so much to solve the problem, it's to show progress. The single most important motivator and catalyst for positive action is making progress and showing forward momentum in meaningful work. It's being able to see your progress on a scale or a thermometer or whatever it is. It's what I call the power of one. So we've established something called city dividends. We say that if a city increases its educational attainment rate, as measured by 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees, it will increase the per capita income of the United States in the 50 top metro regions in the country by $124 billion. Or let's look at another one. Reduce the VMT, reduce the vehicle miles traveled per person in your city over a course of a year, and do it in the top 50 metro regions. It will mean an economic savings to the nation of about $28.6 billion, or reduce poverty by 1%. And each year you will save about $13 billion in spending on anti-poverty programs. But notice the big one. The big one is the 2-year and 4-year degrees, the $124 billion. Why? Because if you measure the success of a city based upon average earnings, per capita income, 58% of the success of your city comes down to just one thing: the level of educational attainment. There is no secret sauce anywhere, but the closest you'll ever come to a secret sauce is educational attainment. So in Chicago, for example, if we were to increase the number of 2-year and 4-year degrees by just 1%, it would mean $7.2 billion a year in increased per capita income. If we reduced the vehicle miles traveled in Chicago just by 1 mile per day per person in the city over a course of a year, economic savings in Chicago of $1.7 billion. And why not develop a whole host of dividends? A happiness dividend, a smart dividend, an immigration dividend, a resilience dividend, a health dividend, all of which are ways that those levers I talked about, if you can pull a lever and see progress and see change, It's amazing what will happen at that intersection. People actually start to move the needle, and they actually start to do things. And if you add to that a competition, it accelerates it even more. We, for example, are doing a $1 million competition for the city in America that over the next 3 years increases its educational attainment rate as measured by 2-year and 4-year degrees the fastest over the next 3 years. And in all 57 cities competing, it's amazing what's happening. Not only are they mobilized, but they're recognizing that higher education cannot be viewed through the lens of an educator. It should be viewed through the lens of an economic developer, because it actually increases the economic growth of a city and a region. So now we have framed, we've acted, and now I want to do my final part, and that is connect and engage. Our ability to connect with each other is the defining characteristic of our species, according to Ed Glazer, who just wrote a great book called The Triumph of the City. And I would say there are 3 things that drive connections. First is what we call collective impact. It's when people from all the different sectors get together at the same table, have the same set of shared measurement and goals, and decide they're going to focus on achieving that dividend. Then comes networks, being able to connect with each other both virtually and face-to-face, all the time. Being able to learn from each other because there's always something to learn from someone else, somewhere else. And then finally, the power of clusters. It gets back to density. Whether it is Raleigh, North Carolina, and the Research Triangle, or something that I developed when I was Director of Economic Development for Ohio, called the Ohio Hubs of Innovation and Opportunity. It's the idea of connecting people and business, so God forbid if you lose your job, you don't lose your parking place. Because you go right next door and get a job because of the clustering of businesses around knowledge centers where ideas happen, and as a result, innovation occurs. If I said to you today, I had to distill this entire presentation down to 3 concepts, this is what it would be. I would say that if you're at that intersection in the city, if you do these 3 things, you will have a transformational effect on your city, provided you're doing it together with partners from all sectors and all generations. Steve Jobs once was asked, if you wrote a resume, what would it say? And he said it would say that I tear down walls, I build bridges, and I light fires. If you tear down walls and the silos that separate us, you'll build bridges among generations and sectors, among cities around the country and the world. And then you take ideas and you put them out there, some of which will fail and many of which will succeed, and you light fires. You have the chance to change the world. Thank you.